Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of your Brains Coach podcast. My name is Shurina. I'm your host. I'm your brains coach, and by the way, your brains nutritionist. And it is my job here to bring to you all the best, recent, cutting edge, most useful brain body tools so you can operate your brain better, make better decisions, design better life experience, and experience more success. So that's what we are all here about. Over the weekend, I get to make a new friend, and she is into neuroscience and hypnosis, and she helps also people to take better control of what's happening in your brain, specifically with thoughts and emotional patterns. Of course, again, to have a better life experience, to reach your goals. But the cool thing was that we got to talk about all these things, neuroscience and brain related. And when we started talking about what it is we want to do, like what is our vision, mission, etc. And I said, I want to create a movement, and I'm not sure exactly how I'm going to call it and how we going to call us, people in the movement, perhaps something like brain hackers. But of course, it's not that much about hacking. It's just learning how our brain actually works and how we can take certain actions to benefit our brain a lot better and to feel better, to think better, to make better decisions that benefit us, not just in the now, but also in our future. Last week, we talked a lot about our future self and how that relationship can transform your present life. So if you're curious about how to develop better relationship with your future self and why it matters, for example, for your discipline, then please tune in the episode we did last Friday. Today, as you guessed from the name of this podcast, we're talking about caffeine, how to use it to get that boost of energy, of flow, of creativity, of productivity, but without the crash and also without compromising your sleep, the foundational pillar of your productive, healthy, energized, and happy life. I'm talking about sleep, right? Caffeine can compromise that. And a lot of people struggle with sleep because they don't know how to use caffeine, how to use coffee or whatever other drinks containing caffeine there are. A little bit of my personal story. I realized that how you use your caffeine really matters when I crashed a couple of times really strongly. So it happened for two different reasons. Number one, I'm like, well, I'm waking up at 5 a.m. It's probably okay for me to drink my caffeine around 6 a.m. And I tried that. And as I learned, it didn't actually work for me. I needed to delay, as Andrew Huberman, other researchers recommend, my caffeine longer. So now I have a rule. I'm waking up 5 a.m. or so, and then at least 90 minutes, I'm going to wait till my first caffeine. And ideally, I only get to consume my caffeine after my walks or after my exercise that I do usually 2-3 hours after my waking time. So what happened is I drank this caffeine at 6 a.m. for a couple of days, and then I noticed that my sleep started to suffer. Like I just didn't sleep that well during the night for whichever reason. I kept the rest the same. And then also in the middle of my morning, I would start feeling sleepy. And I never felt that way. Usually my energy is pretty even. And then all of a sudden I started feeling sleepy and not doing much in my latest morning. I'm like, okay, the only thing I changed was the time of my caffeine. And so I decided to change it. First morning was kind of more difficult. Second was okay. And then, it all got back to normal. Then my 6 a.m. might not be as on fire in flow state and as productive, but it's still at a really good level. And with that caffeine in later in the day, I don't experience any crash in the middle of that morning, at the end of this morning. And then usually in the afternoon, I actually go for a walk and I do a workout. So I never experience this crash in my productivity. If you, by the way, folks, this week, we're going to talk a lot about your energy management, so you are as productive, as happy, as successful during the day as possible. And then it is easy for you to chill, to wind down, and to transition into recovery phase of your day or your sleep and rest, digest, recovery period. So first, timing of your caffeine. It is recommended to delay your caffeine by at least 90 minutes on most days, unless you exercise first thing in the morning. Then it's being said that then you can use that caffeine because it doesn't seem to affect your circadian rhythm, your energy fluctuations. Why I switched also my exercise, by the way, folks, that's not related to caffeine, but I noticed then after exercise, I will have a little bit of a crash if I do it in the morning, and I feel like I need a little bit of recovery phase, and that didn't work with my workflow during the day. So I now time my exercise in the middle of the day when I would usually have this sleepy moment, and now instead of my sleepy moment, I'm exercising, and that actually brings everything back up to high energy, high motivation, high productivity state. But back to caffeine. So experiencing that crash and my sleep also started to suffer, I realized that early-ish didn't really work for me. So I needed to delay it. And I did that and everything got back to normal. And then another couple of experiments made me realize that too much caffeine can also produce this negative effect, this crash. And I was talking to a couple of friends of mine recently, and they say, well, you always experience that crash after caffeine. Well, actually, no. If you dose your caffeine just right, you're not going to experience that crash. It's kind of going to wear off, but you're not going to crash. You're not going to experience sleepiness and yawning, and you can't function without another additional cup of coffee. So if you didn't know that, but different coffee drinks, caffeine containing drinks, different coffee drinks in your favorite coffee house, or different methods of brewing will contain different amounts of caffeine. And researchers, experts say that a healthy dose of caffeine is usually about 1 to 3 milligrams of caffeine per kilogram of body weight. Obviously, the bigger you are as a person, you'll need to dose up everything to have similar effect compared to somebody who is smaller than yourself. I'm kind of average, right? 55 kilos, 165 centimeters tall. And for me, what works? Something around 100 to 130 milligrams of caffeine, no more than that. And I'm going to tell you how much caffeine in all of your favorite drinks. But what I noticed when I would get a medium Americano that usually contains somewhere around 130, sometimes even, 180 milligrams of caffeine. If I had that, and then on top of that, I have a couple of, those Nespresso coffee capsules. If on top of that, I have a couple of those, that already would be too much for me, and I would experience the crash. Not just that morning or that afternoon, but the next day, I would feel like I cannot function without caffeine, that I usually don't feel if I get the dose and the timing right. So now back to the dose. So regular cup of coffee, again, Americano, is somewhere around 180 milligrams of caffeine. And that depends on the coffee house. Starbucks, for example, tends to be the most caffeinated coffee house. Their drinks containing the most amount of caffeine that you can possibly squeeze out of those beans. Some say, they do it because it creates more of an addiction, that you want another cup of coffee to avoid that crash. And that's why usually the more caffeine you put in the coffee drink, the more likely your customers sugars to return. But maybe that's also the flavor. I don't personally know, but just know that every coffee house will have a different amount of caffeine in their drinks. Usually Americano has 2 espressos shots in the coffee cup, and one shot is somewhere around 55, sometimes up to 70, 80 milligrams of caffeine. And so if you imagine that, if your shot in your coffee drink has 50 milligrams of caffeine, then Americano might have 100 milligrams of caffeine. If your shot is about 75, 80 milligrams of caffeine, then your coffee cup will have about 160 milligrams of caffeine, right? So that dose will change the experience of your coffee. Some people who are very sensitive, I am kind of on a sensitive side, will notice the difference. And that might mean crash in the morning, in the early afternoon, or no crash. Now, let's get back to something also you might have at home, those Nespresso machines or any sort of espresso machines, coffee machines. One capsule usually contains somewhere around 55, 65 milligrams of caffeine. If it's, espresso lungo, the bigger kind of cup, that usually has more, 77 to 89 milligrams of caffeine. And again, even that already changes the amount of caffeine you're going to consume. Now, some of you might actually be tea drinkers. And a client of mine recently told me, well, I thought tea doesn't have that much caffeine. It does. Green one, and black one. So for black one, it's usually 47 to 90 milligrams of caffeine per average cup, like 250 milliliters. And that, of course, depends on the brewing method and usually brewing length, like how much tea you put in your cup and how long you left it there. Then for green tea, it's a little bit less usually for like just a bag of green tea or regular green tea. 20 to 45 milligrams of caffeine. And then for matcha green tea, it's 19 to 44, so 20 to somewhere around 50 milligrams of caffeine per gram, but you usually consume 2 to 4. So that ends up being anywhere from like 40 if you use just 1 gram to 180 milligrams of caffeine, right? So you can see how the amount is actually quite a lot different, and that will change your experience with that coffee drink, with that caffeine. So again, you would usually want to start on a lower side and see what effect it's going to give you. Ideally, you want to be alert in your flow state, but also kind of still on a calm side. If you experience jitterness and you're just anxious and kind of energized but can't really focus, that means you overdid that caffeine. And that means you need to lower the dose. The easiest way to lower the dose without all the measurements is just drink less of the same stuff or add more water. For a lot of people, like, I don't want to drink watery stuff, so just cut it in half. For me, if I usually have, a couple of those Nespresso capsules, making it half would just mean getting one, and then the rest, maybe, I don't know, have some rooibos tea. So the purpose of this caffeine measurement is to get you into your ideal state, into your zone of genius, into what research also shows. Caffeine helps to get into flow state, into that deep, focused, productive, when you lose track of time state, when you deliver 2 to 5 times more work per unit of time. And usually that work is of high quality and it's more creative and has more insights, just better quality work. So coffee is one of those substances, caffeine specifically, is one of those substances that can help you to get into that flow state, because it boosts your dopamine, it boosts your adrenaline. But again, those makes the cure or the poison. So if you consume too much caffeine and gonna make you jittery and anxious, you're not gonna get into that focus. You're not gonna get into that flow state. So that's important. And plus, you will experience that crash if you consume too much caffeine. And then you might need another cup of coffee or another caffeinated drink, and then that might screw up your sleep. By the way, if you don't want to negatively affect your sleep, if you want to minimize any effect, experts say caffeine will still affect your sleep no matter like how long it is to your bedtime or how much you drink. Some say, well, it's a trade-off. So sometimes it's okay to have maybe a different or a little bit less good quality of sleep, but still have this productive day in front of you. So anyhow, you want to time your caffeine to have the least chance to affect your sleep. At least experts say 10 hours before your bedtime. So if you go to bed at 10 p.m., you finish your caffeine by 12 p.m. And then you can switch to decaf if you're at the beginning. Of course, there is still some caffeine, but it will have a lot, of course, less of that caffeine. Some experts say, even 12 hours. I usually go on a 12, 11-ish hours side of things. So I go to bed at 9 p.m. and by 9:30, I usually am done with my caffeine for the day. And that's your caffeine user manual here to feel focused, to feel like you're in your flow state. By the way, while I'm sipping on water, to prevent that jittery effect of caffeine or overstimulation effect, you'd want to consume 2-to-1 ratio of water to coffee or caffeine. Obviously, if you have a big watery coffee drink, that might change. But they say if you have, for example, 1 espresso, then you gotta have 2 times that amount of water. Maybe that's why in a lot of coffee houses, they actually give you a small cup of espresso and a sort of biggish glass of water. That's where it comes from. If you wanna have this prolonged experience of caffeine, drink water. Also, food prolongs effect of caffeine and makes all the crushers not that strong or spikes. Also, if you are curious, matcha green tea, for example, has a different caffeine effect compared to coffee. So if coffee usually tends to have a bigger, faster spike in its effect, and then kind of it wears off quicker, the peak effect. Then for matcha green tea, the peak effect usually is delayed, and then the wearing off is slowed down. So you're gonna have more smoother effect of if you consume matcha as your source of caffeine. I usually add matcha actually to my yogurt bowl. So maybe that's why I also don't really experience that crash, because that effect of caffeine is prolonged. So I kind of consume a little bit of caffeine from coffee and a little bit of caffeine from matcha, and that kind of smoothes out the overall effect and allows me to stay in that flow state, in that focus zone longer without experiencing crashes and spikes. We're going to talk more about energy management on Wednesday, but and by the way, on Thursday we're going to have our LinkedIn event also covering this topic, and there you can ask your questions because it's audio event, and if you raise your hand I can invite you. So that's going to happen on Thursday at 12 p.m. Eastern, audio event on LinkedIn for 30 minutes. But today you got your caffeine user manual to get into your flow state, into your zone of genius, into that focus state consistently, and to eliminate negative side effects like over-consuming caffeine or feeling jittery or feeling anxious or compromising your sleep quality and feeling not fresh in the morning, and perhaps also feeling like I did that your sleep quality suffers as well. Maybe you're waking up too early or in the middle of the night. So to sum it up, to wrap it up, to give you an executive summary of this episode. So delay your caffeine by at least 90 minutes in the morning, unless you also exercise in the morning, then the effect is going to be different. Dose your caffeine and please know that all the different drinks will contain different amount of caffeine. The ideal dose of caffeine for you to put you into focus, into flow state without jitters and anxiety lies somewhere between 1 to 3 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. So if you weigh, 50 kilos, then multiply that, let's say, by like 2, and you get 100 milligrams of caffeine. And then that is the amount in approximately 2 espresso shots, maybe a little bit less, depending again on the brand, depending on where you get your caffeine fix, so to speak. But if you want to experiment with that, start with the lower dose and then go to a higher dose, either by making it double or a little bit more. And then also realize that, again, different drinks have different amount of caffeine, and the effect of that caffeine is slightly different, like for caffeine in coffee and for caffeine in matcha green tea. And I'm not even talking about all the energy drinks out there that contain different amount of caffeine, might contain sugar, might contain other vitamins and minerals or psychoactive compounds like L-theanine, like that is something you find in green tea or any tea, actually. So experiment with your caffeine amount. And if in the morning you feel like you're never up without that caffeine, you might actually get so addicted, so used to that caffeine effect that your brain chemistry doesn't work well without it. So to get back to your normal, don't consume any caffeine for 3-4 days, maybe when you were on vacation or sometime when it's not going to make such a difference in your productivity and in your day. So what we're doing there is we kind of like with a drug, we're going through withdrawal system, we making our brain sensitive again, all the receptors to the effect of caffeine. And then once you return to your caffeine after 3-4 days of abstaining completely from anything that has caffeine, the effect start with a small dose, and the effect of caffeine going to be much more profound. That's what actually research shows, that if you eliminate caffeine completely out of your system for 3-4 days and then get back to that caffeine, you will experience performance and cognitive effect at with a much higher potency. And what do you do in the afternoon? Go for walks and training, exercise, and it doesn't have to be long. It can be 5-7 minutes of high intensity, jumping jacks or some other high intensity interval workout right at home, and you'll boost that brain chemistry that's going to put you right back into focus, into flow, instead of feeling that low state in the middle of the day. So if you want to prolong your productivity, actually what works really well, and it will also improve the quality of your sleep, is a short bout of exercise. Also walk in the afternoon in the sun also works really, really well for your alertness. And that's about it, folks. Your caffeine user manual. So experiment with the amounts, the drinks, perhaps do it like I do it, a little bit of caffeine from coffee, a little bit of caffeine from matcha powder, in whichever form works for you. And now I have my ideal morning when I'm productive from the moment I wake up to the moment I decide to finish work, and that usually a couple of hours before my bedtime. And I don't experience any crushes or any flow moments unless, again, I decide to go on some experiment. But that's enough for today, folks. If you find this podcast useful, if you find this information benefiting your life, your work, the quality of everything that you do, please share. This is this makes me the happiest when I see reviews, when I see shares, when I get feedback. So please share this information so a lot more people get into their zone of genius more often without spikes and crushes, delivering their best results and amazing vision into this world. So share, stay tuned, and till next time, have an awesome day and week.